The dust of dead lives was my trade, and business was booming. I was a neural archivist, a digital mortician for the 22nd century, and my job was to sift through the stored consciousness of the recently departed, curating their memories into coherent narratives for the families they'd left behind. I lived in a quiet apartment on the 150th floor, overlooking a Chicago that glittered with the cold, indifferent light of a million other souls. And I hadn't felt the sun on my skin in 3 years. My world was the echo, the vast, silent server farm where the rich paid to be remembered forever. I'd walk its sterile halls, the low hum of the cooling systems a constant companion, and jack into the lives of strangers. I'd taste their first loves, feel the sting of their greatest regrets, and stand at the edge of their final moments. A silent witness to existences condensed into flickering streams of data. My own life, by contrast, was a blank slate. There was a before, a time filled with the noise of a wife's laughter and a son's breathless questions. But I never visited those archives. Some ghosts are better left undisturbed. My work was my anesthetic, a dive into the curated past of others to escape the raw, unedited pain of my own. It was on a Tuesday, during a routine cataloging of a long-dead industrialist named Alistair Finch, that the world began to end. It didn't arrive with fire and thunder, no grand armada blotting out the sky. It came as a whisper, a creeping stain of nothingness that started on the edges of perception. The first reports were dismissed as technical glitches, solar flares, mass hysteria, a communications blackout in the sparsely populated regions of the Gobi Desert, a fishing fleet in the North Atlantic vanishing from every satellite. Their last transmission, not a cry for help, but a wall of perfect, absolute silence. We watched the news feeds with a detached curiosity, another tragedy in a world saturated with them, before turning back to our screens. But the stain grew. The silence spread, a circular wave expanding with unnerving precision. It consumed towns, then cities. Ulaanbaatar went dark. Then Irkutsk. Satellites showed them still there, perfectly intact. Buildings standing, streets clear, but there were no signals, no heat signatures, no movement, no sound. It was as if someone had pressed a universal mute button, and the world was falling quiet, one piece at a time. They called them the Silenti, a name born from the terrified babble on the dying global networks. They had no ships we could see, no soldiers we could fight. Their weapon was absence. They didn't conquer. They erased. In my sanitized world within the echo, the growing dread was a distant hum. Like traffic far below, I was deep in the Finch archive, a sprawling construct of a century-long life, tagging memories from his childhood in the scorched plains of the Texas Reclamation Zone. The data was old, partially corrupted, and full of static. It was in that static, that digital noise between coherent thoughts, that I first felt it. It wasn't a sound. It was deeper than that. A resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate directly in the bones of my skull. A low, persistent thrumming, like a colossal engine turning over in another dimension. I ripped the neural lace from my temple, the real world crashing back in a wave of nausea. The hum in the server room was unchanged, but the feeling remained, a phantom signal echoing in my mind. I dismissed it as sensory bleed, a side effect of spending too long jacked into a decaying archive. But it didn't fade. Over the next few days, As the silence consumed all of Asia and began to creep across the Bering Strait, the resonance grew stronger. It became a constant companion, a subaudible pressure behind my eyes that sharpened into migraines that left me half blind and trembling. I tried to work, to lose myself in the ordered lives of the dead. But the signal was there, a discordant note in the symphony of memory. It was raw, unstructured, ancient. It felt less like a broadcast and more like a geological formation, a fossilized thought pattern buried in the very bedrock of existence. The world outside began to panic. Governments collapsed not from attack, but from the sheer, maddening silence. How do you fight an enemy that has no voice, no face, no form? How do you wage war against a void? The Silenti were a philosophical plague. They didn't just kill you, they removed you from the equation, leaving behind a perfectly preserved monument to your non-existence. The Chicago office of the Echo went into lockdown when the first zone of silence appeared in Alaska. We were deemed essential infrastructure, our archives a final bastion of human culture, a record to prove we had ever been here at all. The irony was suffocating. We were preserving the memories of a species that was being actively forgotten. My section chief, a woman named Eva Rostova with eyes as cold and gray as the server racks, ordered us to accelerate our work. "Archive everything," she commanded, her voice tight with a fear she refused to show. "Every scrap of data, every memory fragment. If they erase us, they will not erase our history." The pressure mounted, and so did the resonance in my head. It was changing, evolving. It was no longer just a hum. It was beginning to take on the shape of information. Not words, not images, but pure, unrefined concepts. I felt the crushing weight of a dying star, the cold patience of granite, the furious, complex geometry of a snowflake forming in a cloud. It was the universe's background noise, and something was turning up the volume. The day the silence came for Chicago, I was jacked into the Finch archive again, desperately trying to ignore the cacophony in my own mind. The resonance was a physical force now, making my teeth ache and my blood feel thick and slow. The static in the old archive was worse than ever, a blizzard of corrupted data. But through the storm, the resonance was clearer, as if the approaching null field of the Silenti was acting as an antenna, focusing the ancient signal directly on me. I saw a memory of Alistair Finch as a boy, standing in the Texas dust, looking at a strange rock covered in patterns that defied erosion. As his memory self reached out to touch it, the resonance in my head surged into a coherent, terrifying thought, a single, repeating mandate that was not human, not alien, but something far, far older. Remember. My nose began to bleed, hot drops of crimson spotting the sterile white of my workstation. The lights in the server room flickered. Eva's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and laced with panic. "Code black. The null field is at the perimeter. It's not stopping all personnel to the central core. Now." Around me, archivists were ripping off their neural laces, their faces pale with terror. Alarms blared, a futile noise against the coming quiet. I couldn't move. I was pinned between two infinities, the absolute nothing of the Silenti and the overwhelming everything of the resonance. The lights flickered again and died. Emergency power kicked in, casting the cavernous server room in a hellish red glow. The blaring alarms stuttered, their pitch dropping, stretching, and then fading into nothing. The silence had arrived. It rolled into the room like a physical wave, a pressure that stole the air from my lungs. The frantic shouting of my colleagues vanished mid-syllable. A young archivist running past my station froze mid-stride, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes instantly vacant. The light of his consciousness snuffed out like a candle flame. One by one, they stopped. Eva, standing by the door to the central core, raised a hand to her temple, her expression of fierce determination slackening into a blank, doll-like stillness. They were gone. Not dead, but empty. Husks. The resonance in my head was a white-hot scream, a desperate final defense against the crushing void. The pain was absolute, a supernova of agony behind my eyes. I felt the fragile structure of my own mind beginning to crack. Through the red emergency lighting, I saw it. It stood in the center of the room, where moments before my colleagues had been running for their lives. It was not a creature of flesh and blood. It was a tear in reality, a humanoid shape of pure negation, its form defined only by the light it consumed. Its head, featureless and smooth, turned slowly, surveying its silent harvest. It was a farmer in its field, and we were the crop. The void creature's head swiveled and stopped, its non-gaze fixing directly on me. In the absolute, crushing silence, it perceived the one thing that should not exist: a noise. The resonance was a shriek in the quiet cathedral of its power. I could feel its cold, analytical curiosity, the alien equivalent of a scientist spotting a microbe that defied the laws of physics. It began to glide towards me, its movement effortless and terrifying. It raised a hand that was not a hand, a claw of pure entropy. I knew that if it touched me, I wouldn't just die. My past, my present, my future, every memory I held, every ghost I curated, would cease to have ever existed. My son's laughter, my wife's embrace, all of it would be unwritten. Spite is a curious thing. It's a bitter, primal fuel that can burn long after hope has died. Staring at the thing that had hollowed out my world, I felt a surge of it, cold and sharp and pure. They would not have my ghosts. They would not have me. I closed my eyes and stopped fighting the resonance. I leaned into the pain, into the roar of a billion years of cosmic memory, and I let it have me. I did not scream with my throat. I screamed with my soul. I let the signal that had been whispering in the static of my mind pour out of me, a tidal wave of pure, weaponized information. It was not a sound. It was the opposite of silence. It was the conceptual weight of a galaxy being born, the roar of every sun that had ever ignited, the intricate, terrible story of life and death played out across 1 trillion worlds, all focused into a single, deafening point of impact. The red emergency lights shattered. The server racks, made of solid steel, buckled and groaned, twisted by a force that had no physical properties. The void creature recoiled, its perfect, silent form flickering like bad reception. For the first time, the silence was broken, not by noise, but by its antithesis. The Silenti's null field was being pushed back, eroded by a raw, creative force it could not comprehend. Through the bleeding agony in my vision, I saw the creature's featureless head tilt. There was no emotion, no fear, just a cold, terrifying recognition. It saw me now not as a glitch in the data, but as a rival equation, an impossibility that threatened its fundamental nature. Then, as the last of my strength gave out, the resonance collapsed inward, and the world went black. My last conscious thought was not of victory or survival, but of the chilling certainty that I had just painted a target on the soul of a species that had made a god of silence. And I had rung a dinner bell that would be heard across the stars. I awoke to the sound of my own blood pulsing in my ears, a frantic, lonely drum in a world that had forgotten rhythm. The blackness receded, not into light, but into a deep, bruised crimson from the still functioning emergency beacons. My body was a map of agony. Every nerve ending was a frayed wire screaming with the ghost of an impossible current. I was lying on the floor of the server room, the neural lace still connected to my temple. Its fibers fused to my skin. I tore it away with a wet, sickening rip, my own scream swallowed by the profound, unyielding silence. The air was thick, heavy, and dead. It carried no vibration, no distant hum of the city, no whisper of ventilation. Breathing it felt like inhaling dust. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and looked upon the world the Silenti had made. My colleagues were frozen, statues of stolen life scattered amongst the toppled server racks. Eva Rostova stood by the door, her hand still raised, her gray eyes staring into a nothingness I could now almost comprehend. The young archivist, a boy named Ren, who just transferred from the Kyoto branch, was still in his silent scream, a perfect, horrifying sculpture of his final moment. The void creature was gone, but it had left an echo, a stain of its presence in the very fabric of the room. Where it had stood, the air seemed colder. The red light seemed to bend around a patch of invisible, hungry space. I was alive, but I was not the same. The resonance was no longer an external signal I was receiving. It was a part of me, woven into my DNA. It was a low thrum beneath my skin, a second heartbeat in the base of my skull. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see darkness. I saw a maelstrom of information, the chaotic, beautiful architecture of the signal that now lived in me. I could feel the city around me, every empty room, every silent street, every stilled machine. It was like I had become a psychic antenna, indexing the ghost of a world. The pain of it was immense, the sheer volume of dead space a constant, crushing weight. I stumbled out of the echo's main hall, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. The great glass doors of the lobby looked out over Chicago that was both perfectly familiar and utterly alien. The sky trains were frozen on their magnetic tracks. The automated traffic still floated in its designated lanes, a silent, motionless river of steel and glass. Far below, the city was a perfect photograph, a postcard from the end of the world. No fires burned, no buildings had fallen. The Silenti were clean, efficient. They were librarians of oblivion, and humanity had been checked out. For days, I walked the dead city, a solitary ghost in my own mausoleum. The silence was a living thing, a predator that stalked the canyons between the skyscrapers. It pressed in, trying to find the cracks in my sanity, trying to reclaim the noise that I had become. The resonance was my shield. I learned to focus it, to wrap it around myself like a blanket of conceptual sound, a buffer against the soul-crushing emptiness. I was a lighthouse in a sea of nothing, and the beam was the story of the universe. I found food in automated dispensaries that still hummed with dormant power, their doors sliding open to serve a customer who would never arrive. I drank filtered water from taps that still flowed, the city's automated systems, running on their own closed loops, hadn't yet realized that the civilization they served was gone. In my solitude, the resonance became my only companion. I began to understand its structure. It wasn't a broadcast in the human sense. It was a memory, the oldest memory. It was the echo of the universe's first thought, a foundational pattern that predated matter and energy. It was the source code. The Silenti, I realized, were the opposite. They were not an absence of sound, but an absence of information. They were a universal delete function, an entropic force that sought to return everything to the perfect, uncomplicated zero of non-existence. They weren't evil, they were cosmic janitors. And my existence was a stain they had failed to scrub away. My own past, the memories I had so carefully locked away, began to surface, dredged up by the resonance's chaotic flow. I saw my wife, Anya, her face illuminated by the light of a holo display, arguing passionately about orbital mechanics. I heard my son, Leo, ask me if the stars had names. These weren't just memories. They were fully immersive, data-rich, and emotionally raw. The resonance didn't just let me remember. It made me relive. The pain was so intense, so pure, that it almost broke me. But the ghosts gave me a purpose beyond mere survival. The Silenti had tried to unwrite them, and I had refused. Now, I was their living archive, the last library. That's when the Finch Archive called to me. The memory of the Texas Reclamation Zone, of the boy and the strange, patterned rock, pulsed in my mind with a new clarity. It was a beacon within the storm of the resonance. The patterns on that rock, I now understood, were a physical manifestation of the signal. It was a fossilized piece of the first murmur, a place where the code had been written into the very stone of the earth. The resonance was pulling me there, a pilgrimage to the source. I had to go. I had to understand what I had become, and that rock held the key. The journey would be long, a 2,000-mile trek through a silent continent. I scavenged what I could, a solar-powered pack, a water purifier, durable clothing, and a long-range kinetic rifle from a dead security officer, though I had no idea if it would be of any use against an enemy made of nothing. I was mapping my route on a public data terminal in the husk of the old Union Station when I felt it a flicker. Another point of light in the overwhelming darkness. Another noise in the silence. It was miles away, somewhere in the tangled industrial ruins south of the city, but it was unmistakable. Another survivor. The discovery sent a shockwave of hope and terror through me. Was it someone like me, or was it something else I had to know? I followed the faint signal, moving through the skeletal remains of factories and warehouses. The feeling grew stronger, a delicate, intricate resonance that felt different from my own raw, chaotic power. It was focused, artistic, like a whispered song instead of a roar. I found her in the hollowed-out shell of a power substation. She was young, maybe 20, with dark, calloused hands and eyes that held the weary vigilance of an animal that has survived the fire that claimed the rest of its kind. She was surrounded by sculptures. They were strange, impossible things, twisted structures of scrap metal, broken glass, and scavenged wire, all arranged in complex, geometric patterns that seemed to hum with a silent energy. She held a plasma welder in one hand, her face shielded by a blackened visor, adding another piece of rebar to a towering, spiraling creation that looked like a frozen galaxy. She didn't notice me at first. I stood in the doorway, a ghost, watching another ghost at work. I lowered my rifle. The resonance coming from her and her sculptures was a calming balm against the oppressive silence. She was not just a survivor, she was a creator. She was instinctively using the resonance, giving it physical form, turning the universe's source code into art. She finally sensed me and spun around, dropping into a defensive crouch. The welder held forward like a weapon. Her eyes, wide and fierce, locked onto mine. There was no fear in them, only a deep, profound exhaustion. "You're loud," she said, her voice a rough, scratchy thing, unused to breaking the silence. It was the first human voice I had heard in what felt like a lifetime, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever known. "You are too," I replied, my own voice a stranger in my throat. We stood there for a long moment. Two impossible points of noise in a silent world. A silent conversation passing between us through the resonance that connected us. I could feel her story, a jumble of loss and survival, of hiding in the underbelly of the city while the silence took everything, of discovering this strange new sense and learning to shape it, not as a weapon, but as an anchor to keep her sanity from fraying. She called herself Ilara. She had been a junk sculptor before the end, one of the countless starving artists living in the city's forgotten corners. When the silence came, she had been deep underground, in a service tunnel, surrounded by old pipes and wiring that vibrated with the city's dying energy. The resonance had flooded her, but instead of breaking her, it had given her a new medium. Her sculptures, she explained, were more than art. They were shields. They were resonant amplifiers that created safe zones, small pockets of reality where the crushing weight of the Silenti's null field was weaker. She had built a fortress of memory and form. Her survival was a testament to the power of creation against the forces of erasure. It was Ilara who showed me that the Silenti had not gone. They had adapted. They were no longer a passive, expanding wave. They were hunting. One evening, as a bruised twilight fell over the dead city, the resonance around us suddenly warped. A cold, sharp spike of pure negation pierced Ilara's defensive field. "They're here," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the shattered skylights of the substation. A hunter. I felt it too. A focused, predatory void that was nothing like the passive null field that had consumed the city. This was a scalpel to the previous wave's sledgehammer. Out on the street, one of the humanoid tiers in reality glided past, but it was different from the one I had seen in the Echo. It was leaner, faster, and it left a shimmering trail of distorted reality in its wake. It was actively scanning, searching for the very signal that kept us alive. It was drawn to the noise. It stopped, its featureless head turning towards our hiding place. My blood ran cold. Ilara grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't scream," she breathed, her eyes glowing with a faint, internal light. "Sing." She closed her eyes, and the resonance pouring from her sculptures began to shift. It was no longer a simple shield. It became a complex, multi-layered harmony, 1,000 different signals broadcast at once, creating a field of conceptual static. It was the psychic equivalent of camouflage. I understood. I closed my eyes and added my own power to hers, not as a weapon, but as another layer of noise. I poured the chaos of my mind, the memories of the dead, the grief for my family, the roar of the first murmur, into her symphony. I became another instrument in her orchestra of defiance. The hunter paused, its head tilting in confusion. It could feel us, but it couldn't pinpoint our location. It was like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a rock concert. For a moment that stretched into an eternity. It lingered, a predator tasting the air. Then, with a flicker of distorted space, it moved on, gliding down the silent street in search of easier prey. We collapsed, the effort leaving us drained and shaking. We had survived. We had hidden in plain sight. "They're getting smarter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Alara nodded, her face grim. "They know we're here. They just don't know how to listen yet." That night, I told her about Texas. I told her about the Finch Archive and the rock, the source of the first murmur. Her eyes, which had seen so much death, lit up with a flicker of something I hadn't seen since before the world-ended curiosity. "A source," she murmured, tracing one of the patterns from my memory in the dust on the floor. "A place where the quiet is thin." I nodded. "I think it's more than that. I think it's a key." We made our decision under the cold, silent light of the moon, surrounded by her humming sculptures. We would go together. She would build her resonant shields to hide us, and I would be the weapon if hiding failed. We were two mismatched notes in a forgotten song, a sculptor and an archivist, an artist and a librarian of ghosts. We were all that was left of humanity's voice. The next morning, we left the dead sanctuary of Chicago behind. We walked south, into the heart of a silent America, two tiny points of impossible noise on a pilgrimage to the heart of creation, hunted by the architects of the void. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the hunters were just the beginning. The Silenti had failed to erase us, and they were not a species that tolerated failure. The real war, the war for the soul of reality itself, had just begun. The world outside Chicago was a vast, silent museum of the 21st century. We moved through a landscape of arrested decay, where the forces of nature themselves seemed to have been muted by the Silenti's lingering presence. Weeds grew with a painful slowness, their colors leached and pale. The wind was a pressure on the skin, not a sound in the ears. The sun beat down from a sky that felt like a painted backdrop, its light too sharp, its shadows too deep. This was the true nature of the null field, not just an absence of life, but a gradual throttling of reality's engine. We were walking through the slow, quiet death of physics. Alara was our salvation. Each night, she would work, her hands moving with a feverish, desperate grace. She'd scavenge for materials the skeletal frames of burnt-out vehicles, the copper guts of telephone poles, the strange crystalline plastics from defunct solar farms, and she would build. Her sculptures were our campfires in the crushing darkness, our sanctuaries. She called them harmonics. They were complex, spiraling structures that drew in the latent resonance of the world around us and amplified it, creating a bubble of normalized reality about 100 yards in diameter. Inside these bubbles, the wind whispered. Water flowed with its old energy. We could hear the crunch of our own footsteps on the cracked asphalt of forgotten highways. Outside the bubble, there was only the oppressive, soul-crushing quiet. The harmonics hid us, but they also weakened us. The raw power I carried, the chaotic roar of the first murmur, had to be suppressed when we were on the move. I learned to bank the fires, to reduce my psychic signature to a bare minimum, a task that was like trying to hold my breath for 12 hours a day. It left me in a constant state of exhaustion, my nerves frayed, my body racked with a low-grade, simmering pain. We followed the old highways, crumbling ribbons of blacktop that stretched across the heartland. We passed through ghost towns and hollowed-out cities, each one a perfect, silent tableau of the moment it was taken, in a diner just outside of what used to be St. Louis. We found a family frozen around a table, their forks halfway to their mouths, their faces wearing expressions of mild surprise. In a playground in rural Kansas, a swing set was caught at the apex of its arc, a silent monument to a child's last moment of joy. Each scene was a fresh wound, a reminder of the sheer, effortless totality of our enemy. The hunters were a constant threat. We would feel them as sharp, cold spikes on the edge of our perception, questing tendrils of the void sweeping across the silent plains. They were smarter now, more patient. They moved in packs, their movements coordinated. They were learning to listen, to distinguish the subtle signature of our shielded resonance from the background noise of a dead world. We had several close calls. Once, while crossing a skeletal bridge over the dry husk of the Mississippi River, we were ambushed. 3 of them materialized from the shimmering heat haze, silent predators converging on us from all sides. There was no time to build a harmonic. "Run!" Ilara screamed, her voice a raw, desperate thing. She threw a small, it's baseball-sized object at the closest hunter. It was a dissonance grenade, a tightly wound ball of scrap metal and conflicting geometric patterns. It didn't explode with light or sound. It imploded, creating a momentary vortex of pure conceptual chaos. The hunter flickered, its form wavering as it was assaulted by a blast of contradictory information. It was enough. I didn't run. I turned, and for the first time since Chicago, I let the fire out. The banked power roared to life inside me, a supernova of raw creation erupting from my soul. I didn't fire a weapon. I became one. I focused the full, untamed force of the first murmur, the memory of a universe being born, and hurled it at the closest hunter. The world around me bleached white. The asphalt beneath my feet cracked, and the steel girders of the bridge groaned, warping under the strain of a force that had no place in this reality. The hunter didn't die. It was unmade. Its form of pure negation was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of pure information, its equation solved and erased in a single, silent blast. The other 2 recoiled, their forms flickering violently. They had felt the blast, not as an attack, but as a fundamental violation of their nature. They hesitated, their predatory certainty shaken. And in that moment of hesitation, we were gone, disappearing into the maze of dead vehicles on the far side of the bridge. The aftermath was brutal. The effort left me half dead, bleeding from my nose and ears, my vision a blurry mess. I collapsed, and Ilara had to drag me into the shelter of an overturned transport truck. It took 2 days for the worst of the seizures to pass. "You can't do that again," she whispered, her face pale as she cleaned the dried blood from my face with a damp cloth. "It's killing you. You're burning out." "It saved us," I rasped, the taste of ozone and static still thick in my mouth. "This time," she countered, her eyes dark with a fear she rarely showed. "They felt that. All of them. You didn't just kill it. You sent up a flare. They know where we are now. They know what you are." She was right. After that, the nature of the hunt changed. They were no longer just searching. They were corralling us. They drove us away from the old highways, away from the shelter of the dead cities, and into the vast, empty spaces of the Texas Reclamation Zone. This was the landscape from Alistair Finch's memories, a blasted, sun-scorched wasteland of red dust and jagged rock formations, the scars of a century-old climate war that had never fully healed. The silence here was different. It was older, deeper. The land itself felt empty, stripped of its life and history long before the Salenti had arrived. Building the harmonics became harder. There was less scrap, less resonant material for Ilara to work with. Our bubbles of safety grew smaller, more fragile. My strength waned, the constant suppression of my power and the harsh environment taking their toll. The resonance, my shield and my weapon, was becoming a cancer, a fire consuming its host. It was in the heart of this wasteland, huddled in the shadow of a towering rock spire during the brutal heat of the day, that I finally understood the true nature of my connection to the Finch archive. The memories of the boy and the patterned rock were not just a guide, they were an invitation. Alistair Finch hadn't just found a rock, he had been chosen by it. He was a carrier, a dormant seed, just like me. His archive, his entire recorded consciousness, was a key. And the rock was the lock. The resonance wasn't just in me, it was in his data. A latent echo waiting for the right frequency to awaken it. The Salenti's null field had been that frequency. It had acted like a developer on a photographic plate, revealing the hidden image in both of us. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a design, a contingency plan buried in the bloodline of a species, waiting for the day the universe's janitors came to clean house. We found the site a week later. It wasn't a single rock. It was a vast, circular canyon, miles in diameter, its walls carved with the same impossible geometric patterns. It looked less like a geological formation and more like a wound in the surface of the planet, a place where the skin of reality had been peeled back to show the ancient, coded bone beneath. In the center of the canyon, a single, monolithic pillar of obsidian-like stone reached for the sky. It hummed with a power that made my teeth ache, a silent symphony that dwarfed my own internal roar. This was the source. This was the amplifier. And we had been herded here. As we stood on the canyon rim, looking down at the pillar, they appeared. Dozens of them. Hunters materializing on the canyon floor. Their void-like forms a stark, sickening contrast to the vibrant, coded energy of the canyon walls. More appeared on the rim behind us, cutting off our escape. They did not attack. They waited, silent sentinels of the void, their purpose clear. This was not an ambush. It was an arena, a trap laid not for two desperate survivors, but for the power I carried. They had corralled me to the one place on the planet where I couldn't hide, the one place where my power would be amplified 1,000-fold. They wanted me to burn out. They wanted me to go supernova and extinguish myself, taking this sacred, noisy place with me. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. Ilara looked at me, her face streaked with dust, her eyes reflecting the humming energy of the canyon. "They're not trying to kill us," she said, her voice heavy with a dawning horror. "They're trying to make you into a bomb." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, and a faint red light was pulsing under the skin. The proximity to the source was making the resonance inside me unstable, the fire threatening to rage out of control. I was a living, breathing critical mass. In the center of the canyon, a new shape began to form. It was larger than the others, its form less humanoid, more regal. A shimmering, heatless, black crown seemed to float above its featureless head. This was not a hunter. This was something more, a commander, a priest, an architect of the silence. Its cold, analytical intelligence washed over me, a wave of pure, mathematical certainty. The message was clear, delivered not in words, but in the chilling language of the void. You are in error. The system must be purged. Correct yourself. It was offering me a choice self-destruct, or be unmade peace by painful peace. I looked at Ilara. I saw the defiance in her eyes, the stubborn, beautiful refusal to be silenced. I thought of my wife and son, of the ghosts I carried, of the countless billions who had been erased without a whisper. My spite, that cold, hard fuel, ignited. A bomb. Huh, I said, a ragged, humorless smile splitting my lips. Let's give them a show. I turned to face the architect of the void, and I stopped holding my breath. I opened the floodgates of my mind and let the full, terrifying, beautiful roar of the first murmur pour into the amplifier of the canyon. I was not just a conduit anymore. I was becoming the signal itself. The canyon walls began to glow, the ancient patterns flaring with a light that had not been seen on Earth in a billion years. The ground shook, not with a tremor, but with a deep, resonant hum that was the planet itself, waking from a long and troubled sleep. The hunters on the canyon floor wavered, their forms destabilizing in the face of such overwhelming creation. The architect stood its ground, a perfect island of nothing in a sea of incandescent reality. I felt my own body beginning to unravel, the physical matter of my being unable to contain the sheer informational density of the force I was channeling. I was dying. I was becoming. And as the light grew, consuming everything, I locked my will onto a single, defiant purpose. I was not a bomb. I was a broadcast. And I was about to send a message that not even the silence could ignore. The light was not light. It was pure information, a physical manifestation of the universe's oldest memory. And I was its epicenter. The canyon ceased to be a place of rock and dust. It became a crucible of creation, and my body was the fuel. I felt my atoms being unwritten and rewritten, my consciousness expanding beyond the fragile confines of my skull, merging with the ancient, humming intelligence of the source itself. I was no longer a man named Jacob. I was a frequency, a wave of raw existence pushing back against an ocean of nothing. The architect of the void stood firm against the tide, its crowned form an absolute anchor of negation in the incandescent storm. I could feel its cold, implacable will, a force as fundamental as my own. It was not fighting me with energy or matter, but with a deeper, more terrifying weapon logic. It presented my expanding consciousness with a perfect, irrefutable equation of entropy. It showed me the heat-death of the universe, the inevitable decay of all matter, the final cold silence where all stories end. It was showing me the truth of its own nature, the ultimate victory of the void. All noise fades. Its silent, mathematical argument insisted. All patterns decay. All information is finite. The end state is silence, surrender to the inevitable. For a moment, my will faltered. The sheer, crushing weight of that truth was a poison, a whisper of nihilism that threatened to extinguish the fire I had become. What was the point of this defiant scream against a backdrop of eternal silence? But then I felt Ilara. She was not a part of the storm, but she was not consumed by it either. She had anchored herself, her hands plunged deep into the red Texas dust, her own small, stubborn resonance a single, clear note in my roaring symphony. She was not broadcasting a universe's history. She was broadcasting a single, illogical, and fundamentally human concept hope. She was a sculptor, a creator. Her truth was not in the inevitable end, but in the defiant, beautiful act of making something new in the face of it. Her will, her art, her refusal to be erased became my shield. I rejected the architect's cold logic. You see the end of the book. I broadcasted back. My thoughts no longer human words, but pure, conceptual force. I am the first word on the first page. I stopped pushing the energy outward as a weapon and instead pulled it inward, focusing the entire, amplified power of the canyon, not on the hunters, but on myself. The light condensed, collapsing into a single, white-hot point where I stood. The canyon floor buckled. The monolithic pillar at the center of the canyon cracked, ancient energy arcing from its core and pouring into me. I was no longer just channeling the signal. I was integrating it. The source was becoming a part of my being, its fossilized memory flowing into my soul, and I felt a shift, a fundamental change in my own code. I was no longer just a human who could hear the resonance. I was becoming something else entirely, a new form of life born from the marriage of human consciousness and the universe's source code, a true echo of the first murmur. The architect recognized this transformation, and its cold logic was replaced by something new urgency. It could not allow this new equation to be solved. It moved, gliding through the storm, its hand of pure entropy raised, no longer content to let me burn myself out. It was coming to personally delete the error. Ilara screamed, a raw, desperate sound that cut through even the cosmic roar. She began to dismantle her own dissonance grenades, tearing at the chaotic patterns with her bare hands, trying to create a weapon that could disrupt a god. The architect ignored her. Its focus was entirely on me, on the critical, volatile process I had initiated. It was almost upon me, its entropic touch just seconds away from unmaking me forever. And then, something impossible happened. From the cracked pillar at the heart of the canyon, a second wave of energy erupted, but this one was different. It was not the raw, creative force of the first murmur. It was structured, data, a voice. It poured into my mind, not as a whisper, but as a fully formed consciousness that had been sleeping within the stone for millennia. Contingency active, the voice said, its tone ancient, weary, and impossibly vast. Designate Silenti. Threat class Eschaton. Awakening the Custodian. The architect stopped. For the first time, its perfect, implacable form showed a flicker of something akin to surprise. The ground at the base of the pillar split open, not with violence, but with the clean precision of a hidden door. From the darkness below, a shape began to rise. It was not a machine, nor was it flesh. It was a golem of living stone and petrified light. Its body formed from the same obsidian material as the pillar. its veins glowing with the ancient, coded patterns of the canyon walls. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs too long, its head a smooth, featureless ovoid. It was a sentinel, a guardian left behind by a civilization so old it had witnessed the birth of the stars. The Custodian. It turned its blank face toward the architect. And the two beings, one of perfect creation and one of perfect negation, faced each other across the storm. The Custodian raised a hand, and the roaring energy of the canyon, my energy flowed into it, not taken, but borrowed. It was using me as a power source. Stand down. Anomaly. The Custodian broadcasted, its thought voice, a chorus of 1,000 different minds speaking in unison. This system is protected under the First Covenant. Your function is terminated. The architect responded with a blast of pure negation, a wave of entropy that should have aged the Custodian 1 billion years in a single second. But the Custodian did not age. It held up its hand, and the ancient codes on its skin flared, capturing the entropic wave and turning it into a contained, shimmering black sphere of absolute zero. It held the Silenti's ultimate weapon in its palm like a child's toy. Then it closed its fist. The sphere vanished. The architect recoiled, its form flickering violently. The Custodian had not just blocked its attack, it had deleted the deletion. It had demonstrated a mastery of reality that was beyond the Silenti's comprehension. The stalemate was broken. The architect turned and dissolved into a ripple of distorted space, abandoning the field. The other hunters vanished with it, their mission an absolute failure. As they disappeared, the incandescent storm in the canyon collapsed. The light and energy rushing back into my body and into the pillar, leaving behind a sudden, shocking quiet. I fell to my knees, gasping, my body my own again, but irrevocably changed. The fire was no longer a raging inferno. It was a pilot light, a steady, controlled burn that was now a permanent part of me. Ilara rushed to my side, her face a mask of awe and terror. What was that thing? She breathed, staring at the silent, towering golem that stood over us. The Custodian turned its featureless head towards me. The subject is stabilized. It broadcasted into my mind. The core integration was successful. You are the first of the new cycle. You are the echo. I struggled to my feet, my new body feeling both fragile and infinitely powerful. What are you, I asked, my own thoughts feeling small and clumsy in its presence. I am the guardian of this world, one of many failsafes left by the gardeners. It replied, this planet is not a home. It is a seed bank, a repository of the first murmur, designed to birth a species capable of defending reality against the encroaching silence. The gardeners, Ilara whispered, her voice full of wonder. The ones who wrote the code, the Custodian explained. They are gone now, ascended or expired. They left us to watch over their final project, humanity. The pieces began to click into place. The scale of the game we were in expanding to a cosmic, terrifying scope. We weren't a random accident of evolution. We were a weapon, a final, desperate gambit in a war that was older than time. The Silenti weren't invaders. They were a recurring, natural force of cosmic decay, and we were the antibody designed to fight the infection. The Silenti will return, I said, the certainty of it a cold weight in my gut. They know what we are now. They do. The Custodian agreed. Their function is to erase anomalies. We are the ultimate anomaly. They will not send hunters next time. They will send an architect for every continent. They will attempt to unwrite the planet itself. Alara looked out over the empty, silent wasteland that stretched to the horizon. So we hide. We wait for them to come back and finish the job. No, the Custodian said, turning its blank gaze to the sky. The gardener's plan had two phases. Phase 1 was the awakening of a new echo. That is complete. A section of the canyon wall began to shift, stones grinding as a new, deeper tunnel was revealed. From within, a low, powerful hum began to emanate, a sound of technology so advanced it bordered on magic. Phase 2. The Custodian continued, its thought voice resonating with a power that shook the very foundations of the canyon, is to take the war to them. From the newly opened tunnel, the nose of a ship emerged. It was made of the same living stone and coated light as the Custodian, a vessel that looked like it had been grown, not built. It was a seed that could cross the stars. The Custodian looked at me, at the first of a new kind of human, an echo of creation. The Silenti believe their home is a fortress of absolute silence, a place no noise can ever reach. It said, "They are wrong, and you will be the one to prove it." My journey was not over. It had just begun. I was no longer a pilgrim seeking a source, but a soldier being handed a weapon, pointed at the heart of the void itself. The choice was not mine to make. It had been made for me 1,000,000,000 years ago. We were going to make some noise. The ship was named the Murmur, a name I gave it in a moment of grim irony. It was less a vessel and more a living extension of the canyon itself. Inside, there were no corridors, no bulkheads, no control panels. The interior was a fluid, cavernous space where walls of living stone shifted and reformed according to our thoughts. To pilot it, I didn't touch a console, I merged with it. I would stand on a central dais, and the resonance within me would connect to the ship's core, turning the entire vessel into a projection of my will. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Through the ship's senses, I could feel the fabric of space-time, the gravitational tides of distant stars, the cold, empty silence of the void. We were a single, impossible note of life preparing to plunge into an ocean of cosmic death. Ilara, in this new, impossible world, found her ultimate canvas. She didn't see a warship, she saw a mobile art installation, a temple to the resonance she had learned to shape. She began to work, her hands moving with a newfound confidence. She etched her harmonics directly into the shifting walls of the ship, not as defensive shields, but as focusing lenses for my power. She wove intricate patterns of scavenged starlight and conceptual geometry, turning the ship's interior into a breathtaking, humming cathedral of defiant creation. Her art was no longer just a shield, it became our language, our culture, our soul. The Custodian was our guide, our mentor, our living encyclopedia of a war we were only just beginning to comprehend. It stood unmoving on the ship's dais, a silent, monolithic presence, its consciousness a calm, steady anchor in the chaotic sea of my own expanding senses. It taught me how to truly wield the power I now embodied. I was not a bomb, it explained, but a broadcaster. My purpose was not to destroy the Silenti with raw force, but to overwrite their code, to fill their perfect, empty canvases with the messy, chaotic, beautiful story of life. Our target was a place the Custodian called the Fulcrum, the heart of the Silenti's power in our galaxy. It was not a planet or a star, but a gravitationally perfect null space, a cosmic dead zone where a cluster of black holes had created a fortress of absolute silence, a place where the laws of physics themselves went to die. No ship built of matter could survive the journey. But the murmur was not made of mere matter. It was made of information. It did not travel through space. It wrote itself into a new position, a form of transit that was instantaneous and conceptually violent. The journey was a single, jarring leap. One moment, we were in the warm, familiar hum of our solar system. The next, we were adrift in a sea of absolute, profound blackness. The stars were gone, consumed by the crushing gravity of the fulcrum. The only light came from the faint, ethereal glow of our own ship. The silence here was different. It wasn't the passive, hungry void that had consumed Earth. This was an aggressive, sentient silence, a crushing, overwhelming presence that actively sought to unmake us. It was the collective will of the entire Silenti race, a psychic scream of pure negation. It hammered against the ship's hull, against Ilara's intricate harmonics, against the very fabric of my consciousness. They know we are here. The Custodian broadcasted, its calm, unwavering. They are beginning to erase our coordinates. I could feel it. Our position in reality was becoming unstable. The ship flickered, its form wavering as the Silenti's will sought to delete our existence from space-time. Ilara, now! I yelled, my voice a frail, human sound in the face of oblivion. Ilara stood before her grandest creation, a spiraling sculpture of light and code that acted as the ship's main focusing array. She plunged her hands into it, her face a mask of fierce concentration. "Sing with me, Jacob," she cried. "Sing loud." We opened our minds, our two disparate, powerful resonances intertwining, amplified and focused by the ship's systems. We did not broadcast a memory of the universe's birth. We broadcasted something smaller, more intimate, more illogical, and infinitely more powerful. We broadcasted the memory of a child's laughter, the feeling of the sun on warm skin, the taste of clean water, the intricate, beautiful pain of a broken heart, the stubborn, defiant hope of a single, whispered promise. We broadcasted humanity, our signal, a complex symphony of life and love and loss, slammed into the Silenti's monolithic wall of silence. It was a drop of pigment in a gallon of clear water. It did not overpower them. It changed them. The absolute purity of their negation was contaminated by the messy yet beautiful chaos of our existence. For a moment, the pressure relented. In the distance, in the heart of the blackness, we saw them, thousands of them, a silent, ghostly armada of the void creatures, their crowned architects floating among them like dark gods. They were converging on us, a tidal wave of entropy coming to scrub away the stain we had made on their perfect silence. This was it, the final, desperate battle for the right to exist. "They are coming," the Custodian stated. A simple fact, not a warning. The ship cannot withstand a direct assault. The echo must be delivered to the heart of their consensus. "The echo?" I asked, my heart pounding. "You, Jacob," it replied. "You are the message. You must go to them. You must become the song in the heart of their silence." It was a suicide mission. To leave the ship was to surrender myself to their power, to let them unmake me. But I understood. My physical body was just a vessel, The resonance, the story, the echo of creation that I carried, that was what mattered. It had to be delivered. I looked at Ilara. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. A fierce, heartbreakingly beautiful smile. "Make it a good one," she whispered. I nodded, a lump in my throat. I walked to the edge of the ship's dais, and the outer wall dissolved, opening directly into the terrifying, absolute void. I took a deep breath, and I stepped out. The moment I left the ship's protective field, their collective will hit me. It was a pain beyond comprehension, a systematic deconstruction of my entire being. My memories were torn away. My physical form dissolved into constituent atoms. I was being unwritten, erased, deleted. But as my body came apart, I let go of my final anchor. I released the core of my being, the pure, untamed resonance of the first murmur, the echo that the Custodian had awakened in me. It erupted from my dissolving form not as a shout, but as a seed, a single, perfect point of infinite information planted in the very heart of their collective consciousness. It was the ultimate Trojan horse. It was not a weapon they could fight. It was an idea they could not ignore. The idea was this: something is more beautiful than nothing. As the last vestiges of my physical self were erased, I witnessed a miracle. The Salenti Armada faltered. A flicker of something passed through their collective mind, a memory that was not their own, a feeling, confusion. For the first time in their billion-year existence, the perfect, unified chorus of the void had a single, discordant note. They had been defined by their purity, their absolute nature. I had introduced a variable into their perfect equation. I had infected them with a story. My consciousness was gone, scattered into the void, but the echo remained, a virus of creation spreading through the heart of their silence. Back on the murmur, Ilara watched as the silent, ghostly armadas simply stopped. Their coordinated attack dissolved. Some of them just faded, their forms losing coherence. Others turned and drifted away into the darkness, their purpose forgotten. The war was over, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A story had been told, and it could not be unheard. Ilara, alone with the Custodian, turned the ship around. She piloted it not with raw power, but with a quiet, focused grace. She wrote them a new path home, her grief and her hope etched into the very fabric of the ship's being. Months later, the ship returned to Earth. It landed not in a military base or a city, but in a quiet field of new, green grass. The silence on Earth was broken, not everywhere, not all at once, but in patches. The null field was receding, like a fever breaking. In the places where Ilara had built her harmonics, life was returning with a fierce, joyful vigor. Humanity was not gone. They had been empty. But the vessels remained, and as the story of the echo spread, broadcast from the murmur across the globe, some of them began to fill up again. Faint traces of consciousness, of memory, of self began to flicker back to life in the hollowed-out husks of the people who had been lost. They were not the same people they had been, but they were not empty anymore. They were something new, a species reborn, their minds now carrying the faint, beautiful echo of the first murmur. Ilara became their caretaker, their artist, their historian. With the Custodian at her side, she taught them how to listen, how to create, how to fill the lingering silence with their own new songs. She built great, spiraling harmonics in the hearts of the old cities, turning the world into a symphony of recovery. My ghosts were at peace. My son, my wife. Their stories were now woven into the fabric of a species that had stared into the void and taught it how to sing. I was gone, but I was not forgotten. I was the first word of a new story. I was the silence broken. I was the echo in the heart of a universe that was, against all odds, learning to remember its own name. And out in the deep, cold dark, among the silent, scattered remnants of the Silenti, a new, strange question was being asked for the very first time. What happens next? The story, after all, was just beginning.